Excellency, President Paul Kagame, President of Republic of Rwanda, His Excellency, Hakainde Hichilema, President of the Republic of Zambia, Honorable Ministers, Honorable Governors, Captains of Industry, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a pleasure and an honor to be here this afternoon at this phenomenal conference to discuss FinTech for Good. Allow me just to take you to 2015. I'd like to give a quote from His Excellency President Kagame, because I think this sets the scene for the conversation that we'd like to have today. Excellency Kagame said, "Listen more to the one who criticizes you and less to the one who praises you. Learn from them and then do something about it." And that's exactly the theme that I'd like to have today. We want to have a frank conversation because indeed over the last decade or so, we've seen significant shifts in innovation in fintechs across Africa, but I believe we're now at a significant inflection point. I'd like to just call out some statistics. This is just an example, so it's not the only place in the world, but Stanford entrepreneurs generated revenues of about 2.7 trillion annually and have created 5.4 million jobs since 1930s. And for those of you who know, Stanford was created in 1885 and is indeed probably the sort of starting point for Silicon Valley. And indeed, we've also seen that the Stanford alumni have created over 40,000 companies, some of which I think Tijan called out today. So Tesla is one of them. And this brought me to the point of the conversation today. We have some statistics that we share that shows that in 2022, the annual revenue for fintechs in Africa was around $4 billion. And projections suggest that we'll have an 8x growth by 2025 to about 30 billion. But there are a couple of constraints that I think exist. And this is what I'd like to start in terms of opening to our panel, because I think the issue of 8x only takes Africa in terms of contribution to the global revenues that fintechs have of slightly under 10%. And I think what we need to do in the next 3 to 5 years is try and accelerate that to 20x. So without further ado, Dari, let me start with you. I'd like to start with you and like you to share some of the critical challenges you as an entrepreneur who has created MSF Africa and exists within various markets on the continent. What are some of the challenges you see, and what are some of the policy constraints that you go through which you think is inhibiting not just your business, but other fintechs across the continent? Thank you.
No, thank you. Thanks very much. All protocol observed. It's a real pleasure to be here in Kigali. Like Tijan mentioned, my first visit was actually 22 years ago, 2001. And coming here and see the progress that has been made give me a lot of hope for a lot of countries across Africa. And I want to build on what President Kagame and President Hichilema said about the post office. And, you know, before the post office to send money, there was also just making calls to home. And there was a time where we also have to, first of all, write a letter to set a date and time we're going to call. And then find, you know, those payphones that I don't see anymore to actually call from there, call a neighbor to be able to talk to our parents. So first, we have to recognize that we made a lot of progress and that we no longer need to do this. You know, we all take for granted in this room that if I just flash my mom's number off the screen here in Benin, we all take for granted that we can call her. We can probably dial her in, she can follow the debate today. 30 years, 40 years ago, we couldn't take that for granted. We have made progress, and that communication has laid a foundation on which mobile money was built. And I was privileged enough to be part of, with my ex-colleague from MTN, Minister, I was sitting next to him there, to be part of building that mobile money, which makes it also most people across Africa today take for granted that they can move money domestically. You know, pick up my phone in Zambia, or whether I'm in Lusaka, I'm in Kigali, that I can send money to someone else within those countries. But many times today, the question of the cross-border came through. And the cross-border is not just something that we want to do because it's cool. It is something that we need because our markets are too small. That doesn't matter really how brilliant your idea is in Zambia. If what you're coming up with, and I'm talking about digital services here, is only limited to Zambia, it is too small. And we will never make it to that list that you're talking about. Your market has to be the whole of Africa, if not beyond. And while we've laid the foundation for communication that allow us to imagine a service born in Zambia today that would be appealing to someone in Liberia, in Madagascar, in Benin, we don't have the infrastructure yet to be able to pay it by all these people from Liberia and Madagascar. And I think that has to be the heart of it. The heart of it has to be that the next wave in the fintech innovation at the level of the continent has to be creating the rails that remove borders, that makes it a little bit fairer. Where you are born does not limit what you can do. Because if you find yourself in Nigeria versus in South Africa or Zambia, you are clearly disadvantaged if you're in Zambia by the size of the market. So I think for me, the issue of the cross-border really payment is the key one. And what are the policy barriers or complications? And MFS Africa, it's a whole business that we have built on solving for cross-border. The number one problem we're seeing is that everybody is happy with cross-border as long as we're talking about inbound. So every country wants to receive, and the regulators and policymakers will be absolutely delighted to help you to receive, but nobody wants to send. Well, how does it work? Who's going to receive? And you take this, and it sounds like, again, when we talk about this, the mind goes quickly to remittance. It's not about remittance. It's about trade. And if you go to the border between Zambia and Congo, you know what I'm talking about. If you go to the border between Benin and Nigeria, you know what I'm talking about. If you go to the border between, South Africa and Malawi, or you know what I'm talking about. The people trading across those borders actually don't see borders. It's merely a line. Most of the time, it's the same people. But today, it is not possible to pick up my phone in Benin Republic and make a payment to Nigeria. It is not possible to take my phone in Togo, Lomé, and make a payment to Ghana. It's probably going to be quicker to drive and bring the money. We don't even need to put it into the post. So I think we have a real question here around the willingness to support African entrepreneurs, especially the digital ones, to open up transaction between our countries. And I think this is more a question of will than a question of capability. The technology is there. MFS Africa are happy to report that at the very least, between Zambia and Rwanda, it is possible. So if you pick up your MTN Rwanda phone right now and you want to send money to President Hichilema, you can do that. It will actually arrive on his phone, whether he's on MTN or Airtel on the other side, thanks to the work that we're doing. But it will not be possible to pay someone in Benin. And that, it's a question of will, not a question of capability. So to come back, I think if we want to really make a change, we have to offer entrepreneurs a bigger market. It has to be the whole of Africa. And to be the whole of Africa, it has to be possible to pay each other with minimum friction.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dari. And indeed, you've called out a very important issue. As we all know today, and I think some numbers quoted yesterday, that global cross-border trade costs about 6%. So for every $100 you're sending, it costs you about 6%. Africa, the number is between 12 to 24%. SDG goals are talking about a 3%. So I think the gap and cost structure is very, very high. Before I go to Tai, I just wanted to share something very quick, because I think we solved the problem of traveling from one African country to another, because I think at some point I was told, this is before I was born, that you used to travel to London to travel down to Uganda. I don't know if that is true. And indeed, the phone calls using the landlines used to get switched in the UK as well, and I'm sure that was similar in West Africa. And now on the cross-border issue, that continues to be a challenge. So, Tai, just taking on from that, what are some of the experiences that Asia went through, and how can we learn from some of the interventions you made?
Yeah, I think for the growth of fintech to proliferate, in this region, I can see the similarity in Asia. So for example, I think there are a lot of policy support that the government can help. The first thing that I can think of is data access. So we see that fintech companies, they actually require a lot of access to data to develop products and services. And the government could actually provide access to the data that is held by the government agency and also other public bodies, so that these fintech companies could develop the product and services that are more innovative and target to the right customers. For this, we actually see the example in Vietnam. So there's a fintech company called Trusting Social. They develop the credit scoring for lending, and the government actually helped them in this front to get the access to data from telecom companies. And they could get close to 80 to 90% of the telecom data in Vietnam. And so they could develop very effective credit scoring for lending. So that is the first thing. And then the second thing is definitely the support on the regulatory sandbox, where the fintech company can develop new product and services and can test in the live environment with reduced regulatory oversight. That can be very, very beneficial because they can test their product before launching to the public. And these can also help to identify and address the potential risks that could happen. And then third thing that I can think about that the government could help is definitely collaboration. The government can help collaborate with the fintech companies, and doing this can also help identify and address the challenges that the sector is facing. And this can also help develop the policy that could support the overall growth of the sector.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to pivot to Dari. I want to ask you a question and provoke you a little bit. Today in Africa, we have, of course, 54, 55, depending on where you sit. But in your business and your business model, and the fact that when you're looking at driving technology, are we going to set up 54 times 2 tier 4 data centers that, and then build regulatory sandboxes across 54 different countries? Or is there a need to rethink the business model? Because you're talking about the fact that today, and as we know the pyramid in Africa, I think there's 5 or 6 countries with populations of above 90 million, and then it drops between 50 and 30, and then quite a few countries are sitting below 20 million. So in terms of business cases, in terms of actually driving fintechs that are sustainable,
yeah,
what do we need to change? Because is Africa going to be treated completely as a segmented market, especially around the digital footprint that we need to put in place? What are your views on that?
Yeah. No, it's something that keeps me awake. You know, as a business that started in South Africa, where I'm based, and now we operate in 40 countries across the continent. We connect over 400 million mobile wallets. We facilitate cross-border payment within Africa. But most importantly, we are the infrastructure on which rely many fintechs to expand in markets. So someone starting in Uganda, providing a digital loan, wants to expand to Kenya or into Cote d'Ivoire, they will continue to use our infrastructure to do that. So we get a bit of a first-hand experience of what it means to scale across the continent. And to your question, the question of data center, localization of data, and regulatory sandbox comes. Obviously, I mean, regulators has a difficult job, and we have to acknowledge that, because on one hand, you have all these entrepreneurs, including myself, shouting at them every day that they need to make it easier. But they also have a huge responsibility to protect the consumers, especially the most vulnerable one. And we know that even, I mean, you look at how my own father used Facebook, someone should stop him. Like, he's just not equipped to do that. And when it comes to money, it's even more. So there is a delicate balance around the data and the data protection, and there is difficult debate around sovereignty and what, the state, the protection, and we know that, there are some countries that are more difficult than others. There is instability in some countries. So I don't think there is a blanket answer to the question of the data and the data center and how data should be localized, but I think there is an answer to the question of the regulatory sandbox. I think Europe, or European Union at least, offered us a great example in the passporting. And I think it's high time that we consider that if I'm good enough to have a PSP license here in Rwanda, why can't I passport it to Zambia? And vice versa. Now, the beautiful thing about the passporting is we don't need a big AU summit to decide this. It's like the visa. Each country can decide. Rwanda can decide, I trust Zambia enough that if you have passed whatever regulatory barriers the Zambian authority put in place and you got your license, you can passport to Rwanda. So, since you ask us to be provocative and I have the opportunity to, I will put the question to the head of state to say, why don't we at least start there? And in many instances, both Zambia and Rwanda has shown extreme leadership when it comes to technology and entrepreneurship. And I'm sure my fellow entrepreneurs in the room will want to expand from one of these countries to the other. And I think we need to see more of that, and we need to really think about how to simplify. Because at the end of the day, markets matter. If you have an idea in the US, it's more valuable than having the same idea in Guinea-Conakry. Why? Because the market is so much bigger. So how do we give bigger markets to our entrepreneurs? That has to be part of policy.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Tai, I want to tell a quick story. This story goes back to my time in the telco sector. About 10 years ago, I was in Safaricom. And of course, M-Pesa was a big thing at that time. And what used to happen was used to run hackathons, and every time you brought in all these excellent young engineers and developers, they would all be solving the same problem. So you have 100 guys or 200 people in the room, and they come in blind because they don't actually have anything else that they know. They don't have any data around where the next big thing is. They don't have any data around what the opportunities are. So from their vantage point, they go in, they sit, and you present a problem, and everybody tries to solve that problem. And assuming 3 of them fix it, the other 197 go home with nothing. So I just want to pick from your understanding and experience, again, in Asia. How has government, academia, and potentially private sector come together to hopefully present opportunities that then fintechs who are young and upcoming have an idea of where the problem statements are and where they should spend some of their time in developing solutions, so we don't get this crowd mentality where we're all chasing after one prize, because of course not everybody will win.
Yeah, so for this type of problem, I think there's the need to have incentives and also something to incentivize the market ecosystem to come together for the fintech startup to be able to grow and support one another. So I think the first thing that I can think of is that fintech companies normally have to abide by a lot of regulations, because a lot of time, it has a lot to do with money, right? With lending, with financing, with payment, and so there are a lot of regulations involved. So I think the first thing, I think we talk a lot about regulation, and again, I would like to talk about regulation support that the government and regulators could actually do many things to help the ecosystem to grow. For example, we talk about regulatory sandbox. Other things can be reducing regulatory barriers and also have a clear and consistent policy and guidance. And then the second thing, I think that, for example, access is very important. Access to talents. I think that normally when emerging market try to develop new technology, very challenge issue is that there are not many talents. And that's very important to probably have to develop the talents from the ground up. And government can actually really help coming up with education and training programs to develop these potential talents in the technology area that could foster the growth of the ecosystem. And also to, I think that there's some area as well that talent is difficult to develop. If the government could actually attract the foreign talents to come into the country, that also can actually help develop the talent within the country and the region much more effectively. And this can be done via proactive visa policy. Then I think the issue of infrastructure too, because you know, a lot of ideas could be coming out wanting to do many startups that have very advanced technology like in the US or in the Western country. But infrastructure might still have a big issue, the gap that have to fulfill. So the government and the private companies in this region could also come together to help provide the funding support for the technologies, for the upgrade, the rollout of the new advanced technology, or like the supportive environment for cloud computing, for example, because cloud computing can be very useful for startup in this region because you don't need to really require a lot of capital in order to start the company, because everything can be more like on demand, pay whatever when you need it.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, this is a private sector roundtable, so we're actually ahead of time. I'm just going to allow you some parting shots. Final key comments. Today you know who's sitting in the room. And actually two things about the countries that we're discussing, especially from a financial inclusion perspective. The numbers and especially the growth in both Zambia and Rwanda over the last 5 or 6 years has been extremely impressive. So I think the ingredients for innovation to thrive in both those markets is alive and well today. So Dari, over to you. Again, it's a rare occasion to sit in front of two excellencies who drive a very strong agenda within their countries. You have 1 minute. What's the key message?
Oh, wow. I feel the pressure. So I have a parting shot and I have a request. I've promised my team that they will take a picture with the president. Thank you. Thank you. The parting thought is probably, you know, building a bit on what Tai is saying. I think we talk a lot about talent and not enough about talent density. And I think the two are different. I think, you know, there's some magic that happens when really good people colliding into each other in a place. And I think there's opportunity for that in many places in Africa. And definitely, Kigali is probably leading Lusaka on that, I would say. But there is an opportunity to be the center. And this has no other purpose than just to bring really smart people together, and magic happens. And I think, as we think about policy, and we talk a lot about attracting companies, attracting, you know, investment, there should be some thought going to attracting talent, simply. Just allowing people to go and settle in a place and see what happens. And that will be one of the things that we would love to see. What will that place be for Africa?
Thank you. Thank you, Dari. And then, fantastic. Tai, any final thoughts, any considerations, anything that we should leave with from, again, the Asia experience?
Yeah,
I'll give you 1 minute as well.
I think the future of fintech looks very bright right now. There are many interesting technology that are developing and growing. For example, I would like to maybe talk about the rise of AI, the growth of blockchain, and also the growth of open banking. For AI, I think it has been using for a long time in fintech. But I think recently we have seen generative AI, ChatGPT. I think probably most of you have already tried using ChatGPT and got amazed how AI nowadays could actually interact like human. So the user interface is now very, very inspiring. So I'm quite confident that fintech applications in the future and many of the fintech founders will be quite interested to actually use generative AI to combine with their fintech application. So I think that very exciting. It is a great time to be in fintech right now. And then second thing about the growth of blockchain. So blockchain technology has the potential to be the game changer, to be the revolution of financial system. And that is because the technology could take out the middleman and the financial system can become very transparent, very fast, very efficient, lower cost, and that because it uses software or smart contract to do all the transaction, and that is super exciting. And I think that Africa is going to be probably the most inspiring potential for the growth of blockchain. I have seen in the past that emerging market sometimes because the technology is a little bit lagging behind, there's a chance of even leapfrog to a better technology. Like in the past, we saw in some emerging market that they had low penetration of fixed landline phone, but instead of trying to increase the penetration of fixed landline phone, they actually leapfrog to mobile phone directly. And I feel that there is a potential for Africa to actually leapfrog using blockchain. So that is something to think about. And then the third thing is about the growth of open banking. So open banking is the system that allows the third-party financial service provider to get access to the bank customer data via the API access. And that can be very open for many possibilities of innovation because the fintech companies can develop more innovative products that can tailor to specific customer need because they can get access to the data of bank customer, and bank in return can also get fees from providing this API access. And we have seen in the past the example of Plate, which is a fintech company that provide the API access to banks and credit card providers. So yeah, these are the excellent time for being in fintech right now, and I feel there's so many interesting technology that are enabling fintech future.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tai. Actually, and I relate to the fact that there's a big opportunity for us to leapfrog. And I'm not to simplify what you said, but I applied for a landline in Kenya, where I'm from, in 1993. I'm still waiting for their response. So I think you're right. Leapfrogging is definitely the way to go. Thank you very much, Excellencies and everybody else. Allow me just to conclude with a couple of summaries from today's, I think, very riveting conversation. So I throw out some questions as I conclude. Does Africa need a think tank or some form of collaboration to provide a data-driven approach to insights that then allow the fintechs to fine-tune their business models and scale? And I think we've spoken about scale today, because as you're saying today, if we take Africa, the countries within Africa, and look at them from a granular perspective, we're not going to see the unicorns of the examples that we have for Tesla and others. You mentioned something which I think is very important. How do we actualize the setting up of business passporting to drive regional business growth? And I think it's a coalition of the willing. We look for 2 or 3 markets, we execute, we fine-tune that, and then hopefully we bring in everybody else to say, how did this work, and how do we learn from that? How do we cement the collaboration between fintechs and indeed policy makers? We've talked about regulatory sandboxes. I've seen different executions in Africa. Some levels where some markets are very, very good, and in some markets where they haven't started. And I think there's need to harmonize and really bring imitation to innovation. So I think there's a route there. One which I think, again, I picked up from Ty was around, do we need a R&D fund for fintechs? Is there a need for that? So these are some of the issues that I think we've brought to the fore. Allow me to thank you very much for an excellent session. And again, thank the audience for the time that we've had today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.